The tension between the two ships had been building for 8 hours. Both vessels maintained their positions near the asteroid field, neither making the first move. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the alien ship through the main viewing screen while his crew continued their preparations. "Captain," Nick Carter called from his communication station, "I'm picking up increased activity from their ship. Their energy readings are spiking, and they seem to be powering up additional systems." Jake nodded calmly. "Understood. Alex, bring our defensive systems to full readiness, but don't target their ship yet. I don't want them to think we're about to attack." Alex Brown's fingers moved quickly over her control panel. "Defensive systems active, Captain. All crew members are at their battle stations, and damage control teams are standing by." On the Valdris vessel, Overlord HFY was facing the most difficult decision of his military career. His ship was more powerful than the human vessel, his weapons were more advanced, and his crew was larger. By every measure that the Valdris Empire used to evaluate military situations, this should be an easy victory. But the psychological profiles his analysts had developed painted a picture that terrified him. The humans appeared to be a species that viewed impossible odds as merely an interesting challenge to overcome. "Analyst Kethmer," HFY called, "present your final assessment of the human threat level." Kethmer approached his commander with obvious reluctance. In 30 years of military analysis, he had never been forced to deliver a report like this one. "Overlord, based on our complete scans and behavioral analysis, I must classify the humans as a catastrophic asymmetric threat. While we possess overwhelming technological superiority, their psychological profile suggests they would view our advantages as tactical problems to solve rather than reasons for surrender." "Explain your reasoning," HFY commanded. "Sir, every simulation our computers have run indicates that while we would eventually destroy their vessel, the humans would inflict disproportionate casualties through unpredictable tactics and their apparent willingness to sacrifice everything for strategic advantage." Captain Morrison decided it was time for one final attempt at peaceful communication. "Nick, open a channel to their ship. Let's try something different this time." "Channel open, Captain," Nick reported. "Unknown vessel. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human exploration ship UHS Defiance. We come in peace and wish to establish friendly contact between our species. We have prepared cultural exchanges that we hope will help us understand each other better." Jake nodded to Nick, who began transmitting a package of human music, literature, and historical records. The transmission included symphony orchestras, poetry, paintings, and stories that showed the best of human civilization, but it also included historical accounts that the humans considered normal parts of their past. Stories of small groups of soldiers holding impossible positions against overwhelming enemies. Tales of individuals sacrificing themselves to save strangers. Records of civilizations rebuilding after devastating wars and disasters. On the Valdris ship, Valta received the cultural transmission and began analyzing its contents. What she found in the human historical records made her question everything she thought she knew about intelligent life. "Overlord," Valta called out, her voice filled with disbelief. "The human cultural transmission contains extensive records of conflicts where small forces achieved victory against numerically superior enemies through tactics we would consider psychologically impossible." "Show me," HFY ordered. Valta displayed the human historical records on the main screen. They have detailed accounts of battles where humans continued fighting even after suffering casualties that would cause any rational species to surrender. They speak of concepts like fighting to the last person as heroic rather than wasteful. HFY studied the records with growing horror. The humans described scenarios where individuals deliberately sacrificed their lives to give their companions small tactical advantages. They celebrated leaders who chose certain death rather than surrender. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to view these sacrifices as normal and expected behavior. Overlord, Kethmer added, their historical records also contain numerous examples of civilizations recovering from near-extinction events. They appear to treat species-threatening disasters as temporary setbacks rather than permanent defeats. On the human ship, Dr. Ross and Lisa had successfully developed a basic understanding of the alien scanning technology. Working together, they had created a simple device that could block some of the alien sensors. "Captain," Lisa called from her station, "Helen and I have figured out how to interfere with their scans. We can't block everything, but we can make it harder for them to get detailed readings on our ship." "Excellent work," Jake replied. "Activate your countermeasures, but keep monitoring their reactions. I want to know if this makes them more or less likely to attack." The moment the human countermeasures activated, alarms began sounding on the Valders Bridge. Their advanced scanning systems, which had never been blocked by any primitive species, were suddenly giving incomplete readings. "Impossible," Kethmer whispered as he stared at his displays. "They have developed countermeasures against our quantum scanning technology in less than 10 hours. Two individuals working together have accomplished what should require decades of research and development." Overlord Zephyhi felt something that no Valdres military commander had ever experienced: the absolute certainty that victory would cost more than defeat. His ship could destroy the human vessel, but the humans would find ways to hurt him that his computers couldn't predict or prevent. The Valdres Empire had conquered 17 star systems by overwhelming species that surrendered when faced with superior force. These humans appeared to view superior enemy force as an opportunity to demonstrate their creativity and determination. "Communications officer," Zephyhi ordered, his voice heavy with a decision that would reshape Valdres military doctrine. "Signal the fleet. We are withdrawing from this system immediately." "Sir?" the communications officer asked in confusion. "You heard my order. Send a message to Imperial Command. Classify this species as a catastrophic asymmetric threat. Recommend that all Valdres vessels avoid contact with humans until we develop new tactical doctrines specifically designed for species that share their psychological characteristics." The massive Valdres vessel began moving away from the asteroid field, its engines creating a brilliant display of lights as it accelerated toward the edge of the star system. On the human ship, the crew watched in surprise as the alien vessel departed without any further communication. "Well, that was unexpected," Jake said with relief. "Nick, send a message to Earth Command. Report successful peaceful resolution of first contact situation. Include all our sensor data on the alien vessel for future reference." "Should I mention that they seemed scared of us, Captain?" Nick asked. Jake thought for a moment. "Just report the facts. They scanned us, we tried to communicate, and they chose to leave peacefully. Let the analysts back home figure out what it all means." As the Defiance continued its mission to explore new worlds, none of the crew realized that their routine professionalism and standard training exercises had convinced the Galactic Empire that humanity represented an existential threat best avoided entirely. The Valdres Empire quietly began developing new expansion protocols that specifically avoided contact with what their military manuals would forever classify as persistence predator species from high-gravity death worlds. Both species returned to their respective territories, the humans with cautious optimism about future peaceful contact, and the Valdres with new respect for the universe's capacity to surprise them in terrifying ways. Captain Jake Morrison called his senior officers to the main conference room. The meeting was standard procedure when dealing with unknown alien contact, but Jake could see the tension in his crew's faces. They all knew the situation could turn dangerous very quickly. "All right, everyone," Jake began as his officers took their seats around the table. "We've been in a standoff with this alien vessel for 6 hours now. They're scanning us, we're scanning them, but nobody is talking. I need options." Alex Brown, the security chief, spoke first. "Captain, their ship is much bigger than ours, but size isn't everything in a fight. I've been studying their positioning, and they seem to assume we'll either run away or surrender. If they show enough force, what makes you think that?" Jake asked. "Their weapons are pointing at us, but they're not taking any defensive positions. It's like they expect us to be too scared to fight back," Alex explained. "If we had to defend ourselves, I think we could surprise them." Lisa Park nodded in agreement. "Alex is right, Captain. Their technology is advanced, but it all seems designed for fighting enemies who give up easily. I don't think they know how to handle opponents who keep fighting when they're outgunned." Kevin Grant, the weapons officer, had been quiet during the discussion, but now he leaned forward. "Captain, I've been running diagnostics on our weapon systems. They're not as powerful as theirs, but they're built differently. Our weapons can be reconfigured during battle to adapt to different situations." "Explain," Jake said. "Well, sir, if our main weapons get damaged, we can quickly change our remaining systems to work in new ways. Their weapons seem more powerful, but they appear to be designed to work in only one specific way," Kevin said. On the alien ship, the Valdris crew was monitoring this conversation through their advanced listening devices. Every word the humans spoke was being translated and analyzed by their computers. Kefmer stared at his screens in growing disbelief. "Overlord, the humans are discussing tactical options that assume they will continue fighting even after sustaining massive damage to their vessel." "What kind of tactics?" SciFi asked, though he was beginning to dread the answer. "They appear to view the loss of primary weapons systems as an opportunity to implement alternative strategies rather than a signal for surrender. Their weapons. Officers describing modular systems that can be reconfigured during active combat." Zephyhi felt his confidence cracking like ice under pressure. The Valdris military doctrine was based on the simple principle that overwhelming force would cause rational enemies to surrender. These humans seemed to view overwhelming enemy force as merely the starting conditions for an interesting tactical. CHALLENGE, Dr. Helen Ross and Lisa Park had moved to the science lab to work together on understanding the alien scanning technology. Both women were excited by the challenge of figuring out how such advanced systems worked. "Look at this pattern," Helen said, pointing to her computer screen. "Their scanners use quantum entanglement to see through solid matter. It's incredible technology, but I think I understand how it works." Lisa studied the data with fascination. "If we understand their scanning method, we might be able to block it or even send false information back to them." "Exactly," Helen agreed. "And if we can do that, we might be able to make them think we're weaker or stronger than we actually are." The two women worked together, sharing their knowledge and building on each other's ideas. Helen's expertise in alien biology combined with Lisa's understanding of physics and technology created new insights that neither could have achieved working alone. The Valdris monitoring systems recorded this collaboration with increasing alarm. Kethmore watched as the two humans rapidly developed countermeasures against Valdris technology that had taken his people centuries to perfect. "Overlord," Kethmer reported, his voice shaking. "The humans are reverse engineering our scanning technology in real time. Two individuals with different specializations are combining their knowledge to generate solutions at a rate that our tactical computers cannot predict or counter." Meanwhile, Ryan Bell was down in the engineering section, making what he called improvements to the ship's systems. Ryan never left anything the way it was originally designed if he thought he could make it work better. "Hey, Sarah," Ryan called to his assistant engineer, Sarah Kim. "Help me reroute these power conduits. If we lose main power, I want to make Sure, we can still run life support and weapons from the backup generators. Sarah was a young woman who had learned everything she knew about engineering from Ryan. She was quick with her hands and even quicker with her mind. Are you expecting trouble, Chief? I always expect trouble, Ryan replied with a grin. The secret to good engineering is to assume that everything will break at the worst possible moment and be ready for it when it happens. Together, they began modifying the ship's power systems to include multiple backup options. Ryan's philosophy was that any system worth having was worth having 3 different backup versions of. The Valdres scanners detected every modification Ryan and Sarah made to the ship's systems. Their analysis computers tried to understand why the humans were preparing for system failures that seemed unlikely to occur. Their engineering approach assumes catastrophic system failure as the normal operating environment. Kefmer reported to his overlord. They are creating redundant systems that would allow them to continue fighting even after sustaining damage that would disable most vessels. How many backup systems are they installing? SciFi asked. All of them, Overlord. They appear to have backup systems for their backup systems. Their ship is being modified to function as multiple smaller vessels if the main structure is compromised. On the bridge, Captain Morrison was reviewing the tactical situation with his officers. They had moved the ship to a position near a small asteroid field, using the Space Rocks as potential cover if a fight started. Carol, how does our current position look? Jake asked his navigation officer. Carol Stone studied her displays carefully. We're in a good spot, Captain. If they attack us, we can use the asteroids for cover and force them to come at us from predictable directions. The rocks won't stop their weapons, but they'll slow them down and give us opportunities to hit back. And if we need to run? Jake asked. I've plotted 17 different escape routes that take advantage of the asteroid field and the gravity well of the nearby planet. Even if they damage our engines, we should be able to reach cover or find a place to make repairs. The Valdres. Crew monitored this tactical planning with growing horror. The humans were not positioning themselves for either easy victory or quick escape. Instead, they were choosing a position that would allow them to inflict maximum damage on a superior enemy while prolonging the engagement as long as possible. Overlord, Kethmer whispered. They are positioning for asymmetric warfare. They intend to use environmental factors to negate our technological advantages and force a prolonged engagement that favors their psychological advantages. For the first time in his long military career, Overlord SciFi began to seriously consider retreat as a tactical option. Dan Pierce continued his medical examinations, moving from crew member to crew member with his usual cheerful attitude. He was checking everyone's stress responses, which was a normal part of life on a long space mission. The doctor needed to make sure that each person could still think clearly and work effectively even when things became difficult or scary. Your turn, Kevin. Dan called to the weapons officer. Kevin Grant walked over to the medical station. He was a quiet man with steady hands and sharp eyes that could spot problems before anyone else noticed them. Kevin's job was to maintain all the ship's weapons and make sure they would work perfectly if the crew ever needed to defend themselves. Just the usual tests, Doc? Kevin asked as he sat down. That's right. I need to check how well you can aim and think when your heart is beating fast and you're feeling pressure. Dan explained as he attached sensors to Kevin's arms and chest. Dan started the test by having Kevin solve math problems while loud alarms played in his ears. Then Kevin had to hit targets on a computer screen while bright lights flashed in his eyes. The test was designed to copy the confusion and stress of a real battle. The Valdres scanning beams recorded every moment of this process. On their ship, Kethmer watched in growing horror as he saw humans deliberately training themselves to perform complex tasks while experiencing what his species would consider unbearable stress. "Overlord Zephi-Hi," Kethmer called out, his voice trembling. "The humans are conducting what they call stress training. They are intentionally putting their weapons, specialists through simulated combat conditions that would render most species unable to function." Zephi-Hi glided over to observe the readings. What he saw on the screens challenged everything he knew about intelligent life. The human was not only continuing to work effectively under extreme stress, but his performance was actually improving as the conditions became more difficult. "How is this possible?" Zephi-Hi asked. "I do not know, Overlord. According to our biological scans, the human's body is flooded with stress chemicals that should make precise movement impossible. His heart rate has increased dramatically, and his nervous system is in a state that we would classify as panic. Yet his accuracy with weapons continues to improve." Meanwhile, on the human ship, Carl Stone was working with Lisa Park to study the alien vessel. Carol was using her navigation skills to analyze the alien ship's position and movement patterns, while Lisa used her science training to understand their technology. "Look at this," Carol said, pointing to her screen. "Their ship is positioned perfectly to escape in any direction if they need to run away quickly. But it's also positioned to attack us from multiple angles." Lisa nodded as she studied her own readings. "Their technology is definitely more advanced than ours, but I'm noticing something interesting. All their systems seem designed for overwhelming force against weaker enemies. They don't appear to have much experience fighting opponents who might fight back effectively." Carol smiled grimly. "It gives us some options. If they're used to enemies who surrender when faced with superior firepower, they might not know how to handle opponents who refuse to give up." The two women began working together, sharing their different areas of knowledge to develop a better understanding of their situation. Carol's military training combined with Lisa's scientific expertise created insights that neither could have reached alone. The Valdris monitoring systems recorded this collaboration with growing alarm. Kethmer watched as two humans with completely different specializations rapidly shared information and began generating creative solutions to tactical problems. "Overlord," Kethmer reported, his voice now filled with genuine terror. "The humans appear to have collective intelligence capabilities that exceed the sum of their individual abilities. When they work together, their problem-solving capacity increases exponentially rather than additively." On another part of the Valdris ship, a younger officer named Velta was listening to human communications. Velta's job was to understand alien cultures and languages, and she had been studying the human transmissions for several hours. Senior Analyst Kethmer, Velta called out, "I have completed my analysis of human cultural communications. The results are deeply disturbing." Kethmer moved to her station, grateful for any distraction from the impossible readings he had been studying. "What have you discovered?" "The humans frequently reference historical events where numerically inferior forces achieved victory against superior enemies. They speak of concepts such as fighting to the last person and achieving Pyrrhic victories as acceptable strategic outcomes." "Pyrrhic victories?" Kethmer asked. "Victories that cost so much that they might as well be defeats, Analyst. The humans appear to consider such outcomes preferable to surrender. Their historical records contain numerous examples of small forces inflicting massive casualties on larger armies through tactics that prioritized enemy losses over their own survival." Kethmer felt his four hearts beating faster as he processed this information. "Are you saying they view their own destruction as acceptable if it weakens their enemies?" "That appears to be correct, Analyst. Their cultural references suggest that dying while fighting is considered more honorable than living through surrender. They appear to have no concept of rational cost-benefit analysis when it comes to military conflicts." Back on the human ship, Ryan Bell was making routine adjustments to the engine systems. As the chief engineer, Ryan always kept backup systems ready and made sure that if anything broke, there would be other systems ready to take over immediately. Ryan's engineering philosophy was simple. Assume that everything will eventually fail, and be ready for it when it happens. He had backup systems for the backup systems, and emergency procedures for situations that seemed impossible. The Valdris scanners detected Ryan's work and analyzed his engineering modifications. Their computers tried to understand why the humans were constantly preparing for system failures that had not occurred and might never occur. Overlord, Kethmer reported, his voice now barely a whisper. Their engineering philosophy assumes catastrophic failure as the normal operating condition. They have designed their systems to continue functioning even after sustaining what we would consider fatal damage. Overlord HFY stared at the scan results, feeling an emotion that was completely alien to Valdris culture. For the first time in his long military career, he was beginning to question whether an engagement could be won through superior firepower alone. Continue monitoring, he ordered. I need to understand the full extent of what we are facing. The scanning continued, but with each new discovery, the Valdris crew became more convinced that they had encountered something beyond their ability to comprehend or defeat. Dr. Helen Ross hurried to the bridge, carrying a tablet filled with data about the alien scanning beams. She was the ship's expert on alien life forms, even though she had never actually seen any real aliens before today. Helen was a small woman, with gray hair and sharp green eyes that noticed every detail. Captain Morrison, she said, slightly out of breath from running through the ship's corridors. I've been working with Lisa to understand what these aliens are doing to us. Their scanning technology is incredible. Jake turned to face her, his expression serious. What did you find out, Doctor? Helen looked at her tablet and then back at the captain. They're using something called quantum scanning. It's like having X-ray vision, but 1,000,000 times better. They can see inside every part of our ship, down to the smallest pieces. They know exactly how our engines work, what our weapons can do, and even what we had for breakfast this morning. Lisa nodded from her station. The scanning beams are so advanced that our computers can barely detect them. If Ryan hadn't felt something strange in the ship's systems, we might never have known they were looking at us. On the alien ship, a creature named Kethmer was staring at his computer screens with growing confusion. Kethmer looked nothing like a human. He was tall and thin with purple skin and forearms. His large black eyes could see in many different types of light, and his brain could process information much faster than any human could. Kethmer's job was to analyze any new species that the Valdris Empire encountered. He had done this job for 30 years and had studied over 200 different alien races. He thought he understood how all intelligent life worked, but the humans were showing him things that made no sense. Overlord HFY, Kethmer called to his commander. The scan results from the human vessel are complete, but I do not understand what I am seeing. Overlord HFY moved across the command center with smooth, flowing steps. He was larger than Kethmer, with darker purple skin and silver markings that showed his high rank. HFY had conquered 17 star systems for the Valdris Empire, and had never met an enemy he could not defeat. Show me what troubles you, analyst, HFY commanded in a deep voice. Kethmer pointed to his screens, which were filled with information about the human ship and crew. Their technology is primitive, compared to ours as expected. Their weapons are simple, their engines are slow, and their armor is weak. We could destroy their vessel in moments if we chose to fight. Then why do you seem concerned? HFY asked. Because of what the scans tell us about the humans themselves, Kethmer replied, his voice shaking slightly. Their home planet appears to be what we would classify as a death world. The gravity is crushing, the weather is violent, and the temperature changes are extreme. No intelligent life should be able to evolve in such terrible conditions. On the human ship, Doctor, Pierce was doing his regular health checks on the crew. Dan Pierce was the ship's doctor, responsible for keeping everyone healthy during their long journey through space. He was a cheerful man in his 40s, who always had a smile and a joke to help people feel better. "Okay, Alex, time for your stress." "Test," Dan said to Commander Brown, the ship's security chief. Alex Brown was a muscular woman with short blonde hair and scars on her hands from years of military training. She stepped onto the exercise machine that would test how well her body could handle physical stress. "You know, Doc, these tests always seem silly when we're just floating through space," Alex said with a grin as she began running on the machine. "Maybe. But if we run into trouble, I need to know that you can still fight even when you're tired, hurt, or scared," Dan replied, watching the readings on his medical scanner. Unknown to both of them, the alien scanning beams were watching this entire process. Kethmer stared at his screens as he observed a human voluntarily putting herself through what appeared to be torture. The woman's heart rate increased, her body temperature rose, and her muscles began to hurt. But she kept going and even seemed to enjoy it. "Overlord," Kethmer said, his voice now filled with genuine fear. "The humans are performing what appears to be voluntary stress conditioning. They are deliberately causing themselves pain and exhaustion as part of normal routine." Zephyr moved closer to the screens. "Perhaps they are preparing for battle?" "No, sir. According to their communications, this is standard procedure that they perform regularly, even during peaceful missions. They appear to train their bodies and minds to function effectively while experiencing what other species would consider debilitating discomfort." On her station, Carol Stone was working on navigation charts, plotting different routes the ship could take if they needed to leave the system quickly. Carol was a practical woman who always planned for the worst possible outcomes. She had learned this approach during her military service, where good planning often meant the difference between life and death. Carol's escape routes took into account the possibility that their engines might be damaged, that their fuel might be low, and that they might need to hide from enemies who were faster and stronger than they were. Her plans assumed that everything would go wrong at the worst possible time. The Valdris scanning systems recorded every detail of Carol's planning process. Kethmer watched as the human woman casually designed strategies for scenarios that assumed total defeat as a starting point. Her tactical thinking was based on the idea that survival was more important than victory, and that even hopeless situations could be turned into opportunities with enough creativity and determination. "Overlord," Kethner whispered, "their military planning protocols assume failure as the most likely outcome of any engagement. They appear to view superior enemy forces not as a reason for surrender, but as a tactical puzzle to be solved." Zephyr felt something he had never experienced before in his long military career. The emotion was so foreign that it took him several moments to recognize it as fear. The humans were not just another primitive species to be conquered. They were something entirely new and terrifying. "Continue monitoring them," he ordered. "I need to understand what kind of creatures we are dealing with." The scanning continued, revealing more impossible things about the humans with each passing minute. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UHS Defiance, watching the stars drift slowly past the main viewing screen. The ship had been traveling through space for 3 months now, searching for new worlds that humans could live on. The crew of 127 people worked together like a well-oiled machine, each person knowing their job perfectly. Jake was 38 years old and had been commanding spaceships for 12 years. He had brown hair that was starting to show gray at the sides and calm blue eyes that missed nothing. The crew trusted him completely because he always kept them safe and always made smart decisions when things got dangerous. The Defiance was not the biggest ship in the human fleet, but it was one of the newest. It had powerful engines that could push it faster than most other ships, and sensors that could detect things from very far away. The ship also carried weapons, but Jake hoped they would never need to use them. This was supposed to be a peaceful mission to explore new star systems. Lisa Park, the science officer, was bent over her control panel, studying readings from the fourth planet in this system. She was 29 years old with long black hair, tied back in a ponytail. Her job was to look for signs of life or anything unusual that might be interesting to study. "Captain," Lisa said, looking up from her screen with excitement in her voice, "I'm getting some very strange readings from the moon around the fourth planet. The energy patterns don't match anything natural that we know about." Jake walked over to her station and looked at the data scrolling across her screen. The numbers and graphs meant little to him, but Lisa's expression told him this was important. "What kind of energy patterns?" he asked. "They look artificial." "Sir, like they're being made by machines or technology. There might be buildings or structures on that moon," Lisa explained, her fingers dancing across the controls to get better readings. Nick Carter, the communications officer, turned around. In his chair, he was a tall, thin man in his early 30s with red hair and freckles. "Should I try to make contact, Captain? We have the standard first contact procedures ready to go." Jake thought for a moment. This was exactly the kind of discovery they had hoped to make, but it was also potentially dangerous. If there were aliens on that moon, they might not be friendly. However, human policy was clear about making peaceful contact whenever possible. "Yes, Nick. Start with the basic mathematical sequences. If there's intelligent life over there, they should recognize the patterns." Jake ordered. Nick nodded and began working at his station. He sent out radio signals containing simple mathematical concepts like prime numbers and basic equations. Any intelligent species should understand that these patterns were not natural and were being sent by another intelligent species. For 2 hours, Nick continued sending different mathematical messages while Lisa monitored the energy readings from the moon. The rest of the crew went about their normal duties, but there was an excitement in the air. Everyone knew they might be about to make first contact with an alien civilization. Ryan Bell, the chief engineer, was down in the engine room, making sure all systems were running smoothly. He was a stocky man with thick arms and hands that were always covered in grease or oil. Ryan could fix anything on the ship and often improved systems to work better than they were originally designed. "Captain," Lisa's voice suddenly cut through the bridge with urgency. "Something big is happening near that moon. I'm detecting a massive energy surge." Before Jake could respond, the main viewing screen flickered and changed. Where there had been empty space near the moon, an enormous ship suddenly appeared. It was at least 10 times larger than the Defiance, with a hull that seemed to be made of some kind of crystal or glass. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "How did that get there?" Nick asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It must have some kind of cloaking technology," Lisa said, her fingers flying over her controls. "I'm trying to scan it, but their hull is blocking most of our sensors." Jake felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his voice calm and steady. "All stations, report status. I want to know everything about our situation right now." Around the bridge, his officers began calling out information. The ship's systems were all working normally. They had not been attacked or damaged. The alien vessel was just sitting there, about 50,000 kilometers away, doing nothing visible. "Captain," Ryan's voice came over the communication system from the engine room. "Something is scanning us. I can feel it in the ship's systems. It's like someone is looking at every piece of metal and every wire on this ship." Lisa confirmed what Ryan was feeling. "He's right, sir. They're using some kind of scanning technology that I've never seen before. It's incredibly advanced. They're not just looking at our hull. They're examining everything inside the ship, too. Jake stood in the center of the bridge, watching the alien ship on the screen. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, waiting for orders. This was the moment every starship captain trained for, but hoped would never come. First contact with an unknown alien species, and they had technology that was clearly far beyond human capabilities. Continue monitoring their scans, but don't interfere, Jake decided. Nick, keep trying to establish communication. Send them the same mathematical sequences, but also add some basic pictographs showing our peaceful intentions. Yes, sir, Nick replied, turning back to his controls. Jake looked around at his crew. They were nervous, but they were professionals. Each of them knew their job and would do it well, no matter what happened next. The Defiance might be smaller and less advanced than the alien ship, but it was crewed by humans who never gave up and always found a way to survive. Unknown to Jake and his crew, 50,000 kilometers away, the aliens were learning things about humans that filled them with a fear they had never experienced before.